Welcome, everybody, to CTO Craft's first roundtable, where we are going to solve this problem. Should CTOs be coding? What kind of coding should they do, if they're coding at all? And how can they find the coding as a value-added activity, if indeed they should be doing it? So today I've got a whole variety of folks with us. Andy, why don't you start by introducing yourself?
Sure. My name's Andy Skipper. I'm a long-time CTO. Was CTO at Made.com and Comic Relief, which is one of the biggest charities in the UK. Now the founder of CTO Craft, which is helping first-time CTOs and technology leaders build their skills, build their competence.
And Andy, I wanted to thank you for hosting this for us today. Dan, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, my name's Dan Jacobs. I've been in tech for over 20 years. I'm a recovering entrepreneur and startup founder. The last few years, I've been recovering by going back to my tech roots and doing CTO work as an interim or freelance CTO. I'm very interested in the kind of product side of things as opposed to just the tech.
Great, great. Thank you. Mark, tell us about yourself.
So I've been a CTO probably for the last, 12 years, a whole variety of businesses, very much in the kind of VC and PE space. Currently working for a company called Grace that makes snacks, and enjoying the challenge of moving our technology and the whole business really in the right direction.
Great, great. And let's round out today. I know him as Fergus from the Slack channel. Introduce yourself for us.
So Fergus Doyle, I've been CTO for the last few years, just recently kind of got into the consulting CTO and advisory capacity, basically helping, predominantly focused on early stage startups with their product, technology, people, challenges, and helping them work through those.
Great. Well, this roundtable came up because recently on the CTO Craft Slack room, we started talking about should CTOs be coding? We found there was a variety of passionate opinions about this particular topic. Now, I'd like to talk about and define what does it mean in your mind, gentlemen, for this coding activity that a CTO might do. How do we want to put constraints around the word coding? For example, would we like to define coding as production software, or is this even owning a compiler? So I'll let anybody chime in on how we want to define it for the sake of this roundtable.
For me, it's about production code. So, I'm personally someone that thinks a CTO largely should not be coding, and what I mean by that is they shouldn't be spending time writing production code, but certainly they should have a background in coding and be able to talk through code with developers and understand what's going on.
Great. How do we feel about that definition, gentlemen? Production coding, that is software that gets shipped. Shall we use that as our definition for coding for our discussion today?
Yeah,
sure. After you, Mark.
No, I was just going to say, yeah, works for me if that's the one we want to use.
Great, Fergus.
I was just going to say that I think it sometimes depends on the life cycle of either the product or the company. Often with kind of R&D projects or greenfield projects, then it might be worth a CTO getting involved early on to help define what the project might end up looking like. So whilst it might be production ready at the beginning, you'd kind of hope that would evolve into a much more mature code base once it was handed over to engineering teams or whoever was intending on maintaining that in a longer term capacity.
Okay, so that might be prototyping or architecting or things like that. Well, since we've kind of jumped into the middle of it, Dan, I'm going to ask you this pointed question. What is your view on CTOs writing production code?
I'm really on the spot now.
Yes, you are.
CTOs writing production code. Well, I think it really comes down to how you define a CTO. And so I think that if you're a technology manager and you're writing production code, then you're probably not really a CTO. And maybe one of the issues is that companies can try and pull their staff in all different directions, and that can have really a detrimental effect of what's going on. So I focus on doing CTO work. So what that means is if I'm approached by a company who really they're fairly early stage, maybe they've got an MVP or they don't have an MVP, and they're looking for CTO help, I'm one of the ways I keep that separation of what a CTO does versus a developer does is to say, look, you only need me 2 days a week because I'm not going to be writing production code, right? So what I will do is sit down and do troubleshooting, or working through problems, helping architecting, doing strategy work, a lot of the product side of things, agile coaching, ensuring implementation of agile processes. But I think once you get pulled into this is very much my own opinion, but once you get pulled into writing production code, I think it devalues the idea of a CTO and what the CTO is responsible for.
So for you, it's a part of the definition of the role as you go in and play it. Andy, what are your thoughts on that? And do you have an opinion about the work a CTO does in this area of coding?
So I absolutely agree. I think the definition of CTO changes dramatically, whether it's a very early stage startup that's building out its initial product, or whether it's a 1,500 person monolith. And at those later stages, obviously, it doesn't make sense for your chief technologist, your decision maker at the very, very high echelons to be knee deep in code on a daily basis. But in the very early days, I don't think it makes sense for them to be completely hands off. So I think going back to the question over production code and whether they should be responsible for that, I think it's worth maybe defining what the rest of it is. Well, what is not production code that maybe a CTO should be working on?
That's a great question. Do you have any thoughts on how you'd like to, what kinds of things would be coding activities that weren't production code?
Yeah, maybe infrastructure code. If you hold your infrastructure as a code.
Okay.
Maybe peripheral applications or utility applications.
Tools.
Yeah, tools. Any more thoughts?
That's a great question. Let's open it up to the group.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think the tooling's really important for especially enabling productivity within the team. Kind of anything that you would maybe kind of not concentrate on as core product delivery or platform delivery for engineering teams that the CTO might have more capacity to think about and identify acute pain areas that will help benefit the team if there are some areas of automation.
Okay. There is a lot of coding that could be done. Doesn't all have to fall into the bucket of production shippable code. Mark, I'd like to call on you to ask, when you think about a CTO role, as somebody who's been doing it a long time as well, where does coding fit into how you define the role?
I guess I'm more of an outlier to most of you guys that are here. I was never a very good developer. And so I think the world of being a CTO for me has always been more about how do you make the function work properly. And I think also not being the best developer in the world has also meant very much around how do you build good teams? How do you fill those teams with the right people? How do you kind of make those people work to the best of their abilities? How do you make sure that we're building the right solutions? And a lot of it for me is also about how does the role of the CTO, how do they make sure that they're interfacing to the rest of the business in the right way? I think the challenge potentially of having a CTO who loves coding and loves the technology solution is that the actual kind of business goal could get lost and could get taken over by the technology, kind of I guess the desire to build lovely technology. And I think the role of a CTO is to act as that pragmatic person in the middle that's trying to walk the fine line between making sure you end up with an architecture and a technology stack that is fit for purpose and is fast to develop on, and isn't full of kind of legacy issues and problems that all of your team hate and don't enable you to work in the right way. yet also drive the business benefit and drive the revenue or drive whatever else you need to drive. So I see it very much as a facilitator role, rather than being more of a hands-on coding role.
I'd love to hear the group's opinion on this. You brought up something, I think, Mark, that I hear a lot from people I work with, and that is I perceive a lot of CTOs and technical managers to be quite in love with coding, if I can just use that phrase. In love with technology. It's what they just love to talk about and they get very excited about. Is there a danger, group, for CTOs to be in love with the coding?
Absolutely, I think so. I think that it can act as a really key distraction point if you're not concentrating on the priorities of what a CTO as an individual can bring to the team. And as such, then it's quite easy to get hands-on, especially at kind of crunch times or in tight deliveries for projects. Then, especially if you know the code base very well, then the propensity to just dive in and help out is always there. So I think kind of reining yourself in to make sure that you're not doing that and you are concentrating on building the team and on what will allow the longer term success of the team is very important.
But how can diving in and helping out, those sound like positive things. How can that ever be bad? What happens when CTOs dive in and help out with the coding? That is not a positive thing.
Do you want me to answer that?
I'd like anybody to answer it.
So I would say it's a few things. So one of the reasons why I'd advise against writing production code as a CTO is that there are a number of other capacities that you need to fill in that sort of senior management role or senior leadership role. Those responsibilities don't go away overnight. So if you end up writing some production code that then needs to be maintained, you are no longer capable of maintaining that ongoing without the support of others in the team. So I think that's one area. I think that the likelihood of blocking other members in the team in getting certain code shipped because of other responsibilities or meetings getting in the way or kind of not being able to step back and still act as that kind of orchestration layer across the rest of the team can also be a factor in not getting too deep into the weeds and kind of helping out in that capacity because you're detrimenting the overall project. Great points. Mark, I think you were going to chime in as well.
I was just going to say, for me, I think the thing that I always find really brilliant about the teams is about they're the people that bring new technology to me. You know, I'm very rarely the person at the forefront, and to be honest, I don't necessarily want the businesses I'm in to be at the forefront of technology. You know, I've worked only in a couple of businesses where pushing the edge of technology to where it can take you has been required. But for me, I don't know whether there's a danger of if you understand a particular language and you understand how it works and you understand everything that it can give you, if you're at a certain position within an organization, you know, maybe that gives you almost the power to kind of squash other ideas and new languages and new opportunities that the team are bringing up. I'm assuming that's not the case in lots of cases, but I think there could be a risk there. So for me, it's always been about how do you kind of use the team and the knowledge and the things the team are excited about, and then make a judgment call as to whether it's, you know, the right thing for the business or not.
So if we're too, as CTOs, if we're too in love with a particular technology that we're very comfortable with, there will be sort of a confirmation bias when ideas come with that technology and maybe a resistance to something new. Dan, what dangers do you see for CTOs who dive into this?
Yeah, I really agree, and I come at it more from the Mark's perspective. So I was initially a systems engineer a long time ago. And even now, coding was always something I did to enable, you know, the stuff I enjoyed, which was like doing systems engineering. So even now, when I'm getting involved in projects, I end up like playing with DevOps and that kind of stuff. And then I find myself using that as an excuse not to do other stuff that I don't, that I don't want to be doing. And I think that's a real danger. Is like, oh, I'm really needed here, so I put aside this, board report that I need to do because that's, a bit more of the part that I need motivating around in my job, for example. But where I've really seen, there's a business that I'm advising currently. I won't name them at all. But the founder came from a technology background and wrote a lot of the code, and they're scaling and they're doing really well. But he's now becoming a bottleneck in the organization because really, as someone who was originally a developer and still sees himself as the CTO of this organization, he's finding it really difficult to let go of that. And actually, what he needs to be doing is selling the product. So B2B product. He needs to be out there selling it and scaling the business. And I think that likewise, for someone who is positioning themselves as a CTO, you can end up becoming the bottleneck. You can end up holding the whole business and yourself and the team back because you're so into, the sort of the craft, so to speak. And just one more thing before I move on, is, the clue's in the name, CTO. It's a C-level job, right? Even in a startup where, without a very early stage startup, it's C-level jobs is about chief. It's about being, managerial, and high level kind of thing. And I think that's why I would rather say, if you need someone at the beginning to, put your MVP together, don't look for a CTO. You can get some advice from a CTO, or maybe some advisory, one-off, or 1 day a week or 2 day a week or whatever. But that's different to hiring, a permanent developer who's also doing that strategic stuff. It's very rare that you get those two working well together in one role.
Very true. Very true. Andy, what thoughts do you have on this particular discussion?
Well, I don't know. I'd say for sure the worst cases of over-engineered platforms that I've seen have come from teams where the CTO is, as you put it, in love with the code and spends all of their time, both office and non-office hours, tweaking and perfecting and polishing and building a cathedral. And what they're doing realistically is undermining the rest of the team. They're training the rest of the team to rely on them, which as you're scaling is very dangerous. At some point, they're going to need to be able to hand over. They're going to need to be able to trust them to make technology decisions and architectural decisions. And if they're not capable of trusting the team enough to make those calls, then they're going to paint themselves into a corner. But yeah.
Yeah, well, since we talk about this danger, I'd like to shift over to kind of a practical thing here. And that is, if we've got people out there who are listening, who are coding CTOs, coding managers maybe, who want to be CTOs, but they realize they're doing exactly what we're talking about. They're in production code. They're not spending their time on managerial activities. Dan, I like what you said. Maybe they're avoiding the parts of the job that aren't as comfortable because they have been a technologist. So they're staying where it's safe. And they need to make that leap to really embrace the CTO mindset. What advice do we have? Maybe we do a round robin. What advice do we have for that person who's sitting out there saying, but how do I change? And how can I possibly leave behind the thing that I'm really good at? Andy, we'll come back to you. What advice do you have for that person?
Ooh, that's a tricky one. I certainly found it tricky when I was making that move and totally made the wrong choices. I think too. I was in a position where I wasn't able to hire quality enough engineers beneath me to delegate some of this stuff to. So in a way, I didn't have a choice. But yeah, I'd say my advice is not to do it the way I did, which is continue to do it until I burnt out. I'd say that's the worst possible way of doing it. But I suppose putting it to the founders of the business or the rest of the leadership team, that there needs to be a broader level of technology expertise that you can delegate some of the stuff to. Until that's in place, you really can't start to move away from it. And then I guess choose relevant parts of the architecture to pass on to other people. Do it strategically.
That's a great point. Mark, how about you? What advice do you have for the person who's struggling to fully embrace their role?
I think for me, it's about mentoring. So certainly for me in my career, I've had one or two people that I know have been that one or two rungs further ahead of me on the ladder, dealing with the challenges that I'm looking to try and move up into taking on board. And for me, I guess they were just invaluable, really. I think in terms of whether it was grabbing a lunch with someone and just having a bit of a kind of brainstorming bounce around session, or whether it's being able to ping someone an email when you got into a situation that you weren't so sure about. And also, I think some of it for me was also about working with the rest of my management team. So, taking the board report as a item that we've picked up today, what do you put in your first board report? What do you say to the investors? What are they going to care about? So I think for me, I've always been reasonably fortunate that I've had CEOs that I've been able to work well with in order to try and craft that story kind of in conjunction with the story that they're trying to tell. So for me, I think it's very much around, utilize the people around you, utilize, mentorships, utilize people that you trust their opinion, really to try and, give you the confidence to break out from the bits you're more comfortable about doing naturally.
Great advice. Mentoring, having someone who's even at just a couple of steps in front of you to help you kind of see to see the path. Fergus, how about you? What advice do you have for somebody?
Yeah, so I think I'd reiterate a couple of points that we've probably already touched on in this roundtable so far. I liked Andy's analogy of building cathedrals. I think that's a really important one to focus in on. Just because it makes sense in your head doesn't necessarily mean that either you can propagate that down to the rest of the team, or that you can even hire for it. And I think that's a really important thing, that you need to be able to hire people that are smarter than you, not that you've already made all the interesting decisions, and that there isn't anything left for people to explore and innovate in, and making sure that you've got that space for people to grow into those roles as the product and the platform and the technology evolves and matures.
I like that. Yeah, I know some CTOs and architects want to do the fun parts and leave the grunt work to other people. That's a big mistake. Dan, round us out. What advice do you have for the struggling CTO who's probably overwhelmed with trying to do this dual duty that they see as manager and coder?
So I think that it depends on the individual. So some people, you just need to go cold turkey and okay, I'm not doing this anymore. Other people, they can weed themselves off. One method of doing that is to say, do a lot of pair programming where you start to, especially if you're finding it difficult to trust people in the team, by doing pair programming, you can help to mentor them. And also, maybe you're writing the tests, for example, and they're writing the code. It gives you some kind of way of staying close to the code, but not actually necessarily writing the code. So that's one good method. And just to endorse what some of our colleagues have been saying, I think getting a mentor is a really great way to help yourself, and something I've done in the past. And of course, that's what CTO Craft is about. One of the things we're about is to offer this support and mentorship. So I'm doing Andy's job now, selling CTO Craft, but I really do think that, as with anything else, you look for support, and we shouldn't be afraid to look for support when we're trying something new and moving into a new area. So I've definitely, some areas of the CTO thing over the years of doing it, I found more hard than others, and I've looked for support around those things. Sometimes that's with the existing exec team, and sometimes that's externally. So yeah.
Great. I like to think about it as every line of code that you write, Mr. or Mrs. CTO, is a line of code your team doesn't understand. And so it's yet another missed opportunity for you to build trust, show them that you do trust them, build relationship, and build skill, frankly. So I'm just going to we'll close out with that. Thank you for joining us today at the Roundtable. We hope this is one of many CTO Craft Roundtables. Andy, want to thank you for allowing us to come on and kind of hosting it for us. and sponsoring it. And thank you for all the participants. We do want to remind our viewers that all the views expressed here are our own, not the companies we work for, the people we consult for. This is just us. So for Andy and CTO Craft, want to just, we'll close this out and say thank you very much. Thanks to all the participants. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Great. And we'll stop the recording.